The stale air of my classroom was my sanctuary, a fortress built of worn paperbacks and the faint, dusty scent of chalk. I had curated my solitude with the precision of a librarian cataloging rare books. Each day was a familiar rhythm. The screech of the 8:05 bell, the sea of adolescent faces, the quiet hum of the radiator. After the implosion of my life last year, the kind of catastrophic emotional event that leaves you sorting through the rubble for months, routine was the only thing holding the fragile scaffolding of myself together. I wasn't looking for another woman. I wasn't looking for anyone. The very idea felt like probing a fresh wound with a dirty finger. My heart was a boarded up house, signs posted on the lawn. No trespassing. Beware of dog. The dog, in this case, was a particularly vicious strain of pride and a bone deep fear that had taken up permanent residence in my chest. The first staff meeting of the year was its usual purgatory of stale coffee and forced enthusiasm. Principal Thompson, a man whose entire personality seemed to be comprised of beige suits and weak platitudes, was droning on about synergy and paradigm shifts. I was mentally outlining my lesson plan for The Great Gatsby, letting the jargon wash over me, when he cleared his throat with more purpose than usual. And finally, he announced, gesturing to a woman sitting quietly by the window, I'd like you all to give a warm welcome to Ms. Lena Petrova. Lena is joining us from the city and will be taking over the art department. We're very lucky to have her. A polite, scattered applause rippled through the room, and then I looked at her. Really looked at her. It wasn't a jolt, like lightning. It was slower, more insidious, like the turn of a key in a lock I'd forgotten existed. She was a study in quiet contrasts. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose, messy bun that somehow looked effortlessly elegant, with a few stray curls escaping to frame a face that was all soft lines and sharp angles. She wore a simple charcoal gray sweater, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, revealing forearms dusted with what looked like dried clay. But it was her eyes that stopped the air in my lungs. They were a deep, clear hazel, and when they swept across the room, they held a calm, observant quality, as if she were taking in the composition of the scene rather than just the people in it. And then those eyes met mine. For a split second, the universe buckled. The drone of Thompson's voice, the smell of burnt coffee, the squeak of a chair, it all fell away. In its place was a deafening silence, a sudden, sharp memory of another time, another place. A sun-drenched university studio, the smell of turpentine and linseed oil thick in the air. Laughter that felt like the first warm day of spring. A portfolio filled with charcoal sketches of my own hands, my profile, my eyes. A name I hadn't allowed myself to speak in a decade. Lena. It couldn't be. The Lena I knew was a ghost, a half-finished story I had slammed shut and hidden on the highest shelf of my memory. She was a relic of a younger, braver, more foolish version of myself. This woman was older, her face holding a quiet maturity the girl I remembered had not yet earned. But the eyes were the same. The way they held mine for a fraction of a second too long. A flicker of something unreadable in their depths, before she offered a small, polite nod and looked away. My heart, that useless barricaded muscle, gave a painful, hammering lurch against my ribs. It was her. My hands grew cold, the pen I was holding slipping from my numb fingers and clattering onto the floor. Several heads turned. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I bent to retrieve the pen, my movements jerky and uncoordinated, my head swimming. When I sat back up, I risked another glance. She was listening to Thompson now, her expression serene, as if she hadn't just detonated a decade-old bomb in the middle of my carefully constructed piece. I spent the rest of the meeting staring at the grain of the wooden table, my pulse a frantic drum against my skin. The fortress was breached. The ghost was real. and she was teaching art in the classroom just down the hall. My strategy for the first 2 weeks was simple: avoidance. It was a cowardly, juvenile tactic, and I was deeply ashamed of it. But it was the only one I had. I became a phantom in the hallways. I'd wait until the 5-minute bell had rung and the corridors were clogged with students to make my dash to the staff lounge for coffee, minimizing the chance of an unchaperoned encounter. I took my lunch in my classroom, the door firmly shut, the quiet punctuated only by the rustle of papers I was grading. I was a submarine running silent, hoping my presence wouldn't register on her sonar. It was, of course, unsustainable. This was a small school. Our orbits were destined to collide. The first collision was minor, a glancing blow. I was at the temperamental photocopier, which had, in its infinite malice, decided to jam for the third time that morning. I was on my knees, wrestling with a ream of paper wedged deep in its mechanical guts, muttering a string of curses that would have earned any of my students a week's detention. "Having fun down there?" The voice was low and laced with a gentle amusement. It vibrated through the floor and up my spine. I froze, my hand still inside the machine. Slowly, I extracted my arm, smudged with toner, and looked up. Lena was standing there, holding a mug that steamed with the fragrant scent of herbal tea. It smelled like chamomile and something else. Lavender? Of course. She was watching me with that same calm, observant expression from the meeting, a small smile playing on her lips. She wasn't laughing at me. It was kinder than that. "It's a rite of passage," I grumbled, getting to my feet and brushing dust from the knees of my trousers. My face felt hot. "They don't tell you in teacher college that 80% of the job is copier maintenance." "They leave out all the glamorous parts," she agreed. Her smile widened, reaching her eyes. They crinkled at the corners. I remembered that. I remembered tracing the shape of those crinkles with my thumb once, a lifetime ago. The memory was so sharp, so visceral. It made me dizzy. "Here," she said, setting her mug down and kneeling where I had just been. "Let me try. I used to volunteer at a library. I have a strange and useless talent for these things." Her hands, long-fingered and graceful, even when covered in a faint patina of charcoal dust, moved with a confident expertise. She coaxed the mangled paper out with a surgeon's delicacy. I stood there, uselessly, watching the way the cuff of her sweater pulled back to reveal the delicate bones of her wrist, a simple silver bracelet catching the fluorescent light. I was acutely aware of the space between us, of the faint, clean scent of her skin mingling with the tea and the acrid smell of toner. It was too much. It was too close. "There," she said, standing up and handing me the crumpled sheet of paper like a trophy. "All sorted." "Thanks," I managed, my voice sounding tight and unfamiliar. I couldn't meet her eyes. I focused on the crumpled paper in my hand. "I owe you one." "It's nothing, we're colleagues, right?" She picked up her mug. "I'm Lena, by the way. I don't think we were formally introduced." "Ilara," I said, the name feeling foreign on my own tongue. "I teach English. Down the hall." I gestured vaguely with my head, desperate for the interaction to end. "Ilara," she repeated, and the way she said it was soft, thoughtful. She tilted her head slightly. "That's a beautiful name." For a terrifying second, I thought I saw a flash of recognition in her eyes, a hint that she was connecting this Ilara, the flustered English teacher, with the intense, terrified girl from that sunlit studio. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that placid, friendly calm. Maybe she didn't remember. The thought was both a profound relief and a sharp, stinging disappointment. "Well, see you around, Ilara," she said, giving me another small smile before turning and walking toward her classroom. I watched her go, my back pressed against the still warm copier. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Avoidance had failed. Proximity was inevitable, and I was in so much more trouble than I had ever imagined. The dog in my chest wasn't just barking anymore. It was howling. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Or perhaps Principal Thompson did. A week after the photocopier incident, an email landed in my inbox that made my stomach clench. The subject line was innocuous: Annual Arts and Literature Fair. The body of the email, however, was a personalized nightmare. Dear Alara, the message began. Given your leadership in the English department and your incredible work on last year's poetry slam, I would be honored if you would co-chair this year's Arts and Literature Fair. I believe your organizational skills would be the perfect complement to the creative vision of our new art department head, Lena Petrova. I've already spoken with her, and she is enthusiastic about the collaboration. Please let me know if you are willing to accept this joint appointment. I believe the two of you will create something truly special. I read the email 3 times, enthusiastic about the collaboration. Of course she was. Lena was probably a normal, well-adjusted person who saw this as a professional opportunity, not a court-ordered sentence to spend hours in close proximity with the ghost of her past. I, on the other hand, felt a cold dread seep into my bones. There was no polite way to refuse. Citing crippling emotional baggage related to your co-chair was not a valid excuse in any professional handbook. I typed out a terse one-sentence reply agreeing to the appointment and immediately regretted it. My fortress had been reduced to rubble, and now Thompson was asking me to build a gazebo on the ruins, with the one person who held the matchbook. Our first official meeting was in her classroom after school. I dreaded it all day, my stomach twisting with a familiar acidic anxiety. When the final bell rang, I packed my bag with methodical slowness, stalling. Finally, I could delay no longer. I walked the 20 yards down the hall to her room, the sound of my sensible shoes echoing in the empty corridor. The door was propped open. The art room was a world away from the sterile order of the rest of the school. It was a space of controlled chaos, vibrant and alive. Canvases of all sizes leaned against the walls, some blank, others riots of color. Clay-dusted pottery wheels stood like silent sentinels in one corner. The air was thick with the rich, earthy smell of wet clay, the sharp tang of turpentine, and that same faint, clean scent of lavender I now irrevocably associated with her. It was a room that smelled exactly like she did. Lena was standing at a large central table, her back to me, sketching furiously in a large leather-bound book. She was humming softly to herself, a low, tuneless sound of pure concentration. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air and illuminating her in a halo of golden light. My throat went dry. She was so completely in her element, so at home in this creative mess. It was captivating. I felt like an intruder, a bureaucrat in a land of artists. I cleared my throat softly. Hi. She turned, a smudge of charcoal on her cheek. She didn't seem startled, just finished. She closed the sketchbook and offered me a warm smile. Alara. Hi, come in. Sorry to interrupt, I said, stepping just inside the doorway, clutching my planner to my chest like a shield. You're not interrupting, just trying to get an idea out before it disappears. She gestured to the chair opposite her. Please, have a seat. I sat, placing my planner on the table with a decisive thud. I was determined to keep this professional, efficient, a list of tasks, a timeline, a clear division of labor, in and out. So, I began, opening to a fresh page. The fair. I was thinking we could start by outlining a projected timeline and budget. Lena leaned back in her chair, lacing her fingers behind her head. The movement stretched the fabric of her t-shirt across her torso, and I forced my eyes back down to my empty planner. Okay, she said slowly, a thoughtful look on her face. We can do that, but first, can I ask you a question? I looked up, wary. Okay, what do you want the fair to feel like? She asked. Her hazel eyes were serious, intense. When a student or a parent walks into the gym that night, what's the emotion you want them to experience? Wonder? Inspiration? Connection? I stared at her. I had been prepared for logistics, for spreadsheets and sign-up sheets. I was not prepared for feelings. I I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, I admitted. I was mostly thinking about not having the student poetry readings run into the parents' wine and cheese. A small laugh escaped her. It was a lovely sound, like wind chimes. That's important too, she conceded. Logistics are the skeleton, but I think we need to figure out the heart first. And just like that, she had disarmed me. For the next hour, we didn't talk about budgets or timelines. We talked about ideas. She spoke about creating immersive installations, of combining student art with student writing, projecting lines of poetry onto painted canvases. She talked with a passionate, quiet intensity that was utterly magnetic. I found myself forgetting to be guarded, forgetting the decade of silence and fear that lay between us. I was just a teacher, talking to another teacher. I suggested a theme, metamorphosis, and her eyes lit up. That's perfect, she breathed, leaning forward, her earlier reserve gone. Change, growth, the awkward, beautiful process of becoming. It fits the art, the writing, the students themselves. For a moment, we were just two people excited about an idea, our professional roles and our hidden history falling away. In that moment, looking at her animated face, the charcoal smudge on her cheek, the passion in her eyes, I felt a dangerous, terrifying flutter of hope. It was the first time in over a year I had felt anything other than tired. The weeks leading up to the fair fell into a new, unnerving rhythm. Our forced proximity became a strange kind of habit. We met 3, sometimes 4 times a week, usually in the quiet aftermath of the school day, in the beautiful, chaotic sanctuary of her art room. I kept telling myself it was just work. We were colleagues, executing a project. But my meticulously constructed walls were beginning to crumble, eroded by the steady, gentle tide of her presence. I learned the landscape of her face, the way a tiny frown line appeared between her brows when she was concentrating, the constellation of faint freckles across her nose that were only visible in the late afternoon sun, the exact curve of her smile when one of my dry, sarcastic comments actually made her laugh. I learned the cadence of her movements, the deliberate, patient way she handled a piece of student pottery, the unconscious gesture of tucking a stray curl behind her ear, the way she'd pace the length of the room when she was brainstorming, her socked feet silent on the paint-splattered floor. I was a scholar of Lena Petrova, collecting data points, hoarding small observations like treasures. The scent of her lavender tea was a constant. The sight of her hands, perpetually stained with paint or clay, became a strange fixation. I'd watch them as she sketched, the pencil moving with fluid grace, and I'd remember the feeling of those hands, so many years ago, tangled in my hair. The memory would hit me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless and disoriented. One Tuesday evening, we were working late, surrounded by stacks of student submissions. A storm had rolled in, lashing rain against the large art room windows. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging us into a sudden deep darkness. I yelped, a pathetic, startled sound. The darkness was absolute, the only sound the drumming of the rain and my own frantic heartbeat. "It's okay," Lena's voice came, calm and steady from across the table. "Power grid around here is touchy. Happens all the time, apparently." I could hear her moving, a soft rustle of fabric. A moment later, a small bright flame bloomed in the darkness. She had lit a candle that was sitting on a nearby shelf. In the flickering golden light, her face was a sculpture of light and shadow. the anxiety in my chest eased, replaced by something else, something warm and liquid. "You're very prepared," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Art teachers have to be," she replied, her lips curving into a small smile. She placed the candle on the table between us. It cast our shadows, long and distorted, against the far wall. Can't have a class full of teenagers with sharp tools in the dark. We sat in silence for a moment, the storm raging outside, the candle flame dancing between us. The professional pretext of our meeting had vanished with the electricity. We were just two women, trapped in a dark room. The air grew thick, charged with unspoken things. "This is a mess," I said, gesturing to the piles of paper, a desperate attempt to fill the silence. "I don't know how we're going to get through all this." I reached for a stack of poems, and in the dim light, my hand knocked over a cup of pens, sending them scattering across the floor. "Oh, honestly," I muttered, dropping to my knees in frustration. "Hey, it's okay," Lena said, her voice soft. She was suddenly on the floor beside me, her knees brushing against mine. "We'll get it." We gathered the pens in the flickering candlelight, our hands brushing against each other in the small space. Each touch was electric, a tiny shock that jolted through my entire system. I was acutely aware of her proximity, the warmth radiating from her body, the scent of lavender and rain. When our fingers brushed one last time over the final pen, I froze. She didn't pull away. I looked up, and she was already looking at me, her face only inches from mine. The playful amusement was gone from her eyes. In its place was something deeper, something questioning. In the candlelight, I could see the flecks of gold in her hazel irises. I could see the soft curve of her lower lip. My breath hitched. This was it, the precipice, the moment where a single move could change everything. My mind was screaming at me to pull back, to make a joke, to retreat to the safety of my fortress. But my body was frozen, caught in the gravity of her gaze. "Lara," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. And then, from down the hall, we heard the jangle of keys and the heavy footsteps of the night janitor. The spell was broken. I scrambled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs as if trying to escape. "Power's out, girls," his gruff voice called out. "Best be heading home." I got to my feet, my movements clumsy. "Right, yes, we should go." I couldn't look at her. I gathered my things in a blind rush, my hands shaking. "Alara, wait," Lena said, her voice still soft. But I was already at the door. "We can finish this tomorrow," I said, my back to her. "Good night." I fled down the hallway, not stopping until I was in the cold, damp air of the parking lot, the rain plastering my hair to my face. I leaned against my car, my chest heaving. The image of her face in the candlelight burned into my mind. The fortress was gone. The ground had given way, and I was in free fall. After the night of the storm, something shifted irrevocably between us. The carefully maintained wall of professional courtesy had been breached, and we both knew it. The air in the art room was no longer just filled with the scent of turpentine and clay. It was thick with a palpable, unspoken tension. Every meeting became a minefield of potential intimacy. Every shared glance a question without an answer. We spoke of logistics, of student art and poetry. But beneath the surface, a different conversation was taking place. One of quiet observation and heightened awareness. Lena, for her part, seemed to be giving me space. She didn't mention the moment in the dark, the way she had whispered my name. She was patient, her calm presence a stark contrast to the frantic chaos inside my own head. But I saw the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking, her gaze lingering for a moment too long. I saw the way she'd start to say something, then stop, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. She was waiting. I didn't know if she was waiting for me to run again, like I had all those years ago, or for me to finally stand my ground. One afternoon, I found her in the library, not her usual domain. She was sitting at a table in the poetry section, a slim volume open in her hands. She looked up as I approached, a small, welcoming smile on her face. "Spying on my department?" I asked, the attempt at lightheartedness feeling clumsy on my tongue. "Just doing some research for the fair," she said, holding up the book. It was a collection by Mary Oliver. Her work feels like taking a deep breath. It does, I agreed, my voice softer than I intended. I ran my finger along the spine of a book on the shelf beside me. "She's one of my favorites." "Mine too," she said. We lapsed into a comfortable silence. It was different from the charged silence of the art room. Here, surrounded by the hushed reverence of the library, it felt peaceful. "You know," she began, her voice low, "I took this job because I needed a change. The city was a lot. Too much noise, too many ghosts." My breath caught. Ghosts. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the faint shadows under her eyes, the subtle weariness that her calm demeanor usually masked. She had her own rubble, her own boarded-up rooms. I had been so consumed by my own history that I'd barely considered hers. "I get that," I said quietly. "Sometimes a quiet place is the only thing that helps." She nodded, closing the book and resting her hands on the cover. Her hands were clean today, no clay or charcoal, just her skin, the silver bracelet on her wrist. "I had a partner," she said, her gaze fixed on the book. "In the city. An artist, like me. It was intense, all-consuming. We burned very brightly, and then we just burned out. When it ended, it felt like my whole world had been reduced to ash." My heart ached with a painful thrum of recognition. "I knew that feeling. I knew the taste of ash in your mouth when you woke up in the morning." "I'm sorry," I whispered. She finally looked up, and her eyes were clear, direct. There was no self-pity in them, only a quiet statement of fact. "It's okay. It taught me a lot, about what I want, about what I need." She paused, her gaze holding mine. "I need quiet. I need patience. I need something that feels like it could be built to last, not just burn." In that moment, she was offering me a piece of her story, a fragile shard of her own vulnerability. It was an invitation. She was showing me her own healed-over wounds, creating a space where I might, if I were brave enough, show her mine. The professional facade, the role of colleague, had dissolved completely. She was just Lena, a woman with ghosts of her own, who liked Mary Oliver and knew the anatomy of a burnout. And I was just a Lara, a woman who was terrified of fire, but desperately, achingly missed the warmth. I didn't say anything, I couldn't, but I sat down in the chair across from her, and for the first time I didn't feel the urge to run. The turn, when it came, was not a dramatic candlelit confession. It was quieter, more mundane, and for that reason, all the more devastating. We were in the art room a few days before the fair. The space was now an organized whirlwind of creativity. Canvases were mounted, poems were printed on large vellum sheets, and a delicate mobile of origami cranes, folded by first-year students, hung from the ceiling, turning slowly in the draft. We had built this, together. I was on a stepladder, attempting to hang a line of poetry next to a stunning abstract painting that swirled with deep blues and brilliant golds. "A little to the left," Lena directed from below. She stood with her arms crossed, her head tilted as she assessed the composition. "Up a bit on the right side." I shuffled on the ladder, my fingers fumbling with the mounting tape. "I'm an English teacher, not a gallery curator," I grumbled, but there was no heat in it. This collaborative rhythm had become familiar, comfortable. "You're doing great," she said, her voice laced with that gentle amusement I was coming to crave. "Just hold on." She stepped forward and placed her hands on my hips to steady me on the wobbly ladder. My entire body went rigid. Her hands were warm, firm. Through the thin fabric of my blouse and the denim of my jeans, I could feel the distinct shape of her palms, the light pressure of her thumbs. It wasn't a fleeting accidental brush. It was a deliberate grounding touch. All the air left my lungs in a silent rush. The noise of the school, the distant chatter of students, the hum of the ventilation faded into a dull roar. All I could feel were her hands on my hips. All I could smell was her scent, lavender and paint, and something uniquely, intoxicatingly Lena. Is that straight?" I asked, my voice a strained whisper. I was staring fixedly at the wall in front of me, at the words on the paper. "You do not have to be good." Another line from Mary Oliver. "Perfect," Lena breathed. Her voice was right behind me, close to my ear. Her hands didn't move. I stayed frozen on the ladder, my heart doing a frantic, panicked dance against my ribs. This was not like the storm. There was no darkness to hide in, no janitor to break the spell. There was only the bright afternoon light, the scent of her skin, and the undeniable, terrifying pressure of her hands on my body. It was a statement, an acknowledgement. Slowly, carefully, I stepped down from the ladder. I had to turn to face her. There was no escape. I turned. She was standing barely a foot away. Her hands dropped from my hips, but the heat of her touch lingered like a brand. She hadn't moved back. Her hazel eyes, usually so calm and placid, were dark, intense, swirling with a decade of unspoken history and a few weeks of unbearable tension. The air between us was electric, humming with everything we hadn't said. She knew. Of course she knew. Maybe she had known all along. The question was there, clear as day in her gaze. "What are you going to do, Alara? Are you going to run this time?" My own past rose up to choke me. The memory of walking away from that sunlit studio, of packing a bag in the middle of the night, of the gut-wrenching fear of feeling too much too soon for this very woman. The shame of it was a physical weight. I looked from her searching eyes to her mouth, and my carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. All I wanted to do in that moment was close the small distance between us, to see if her lips were as soft as I remembered, to apologize for the girl I had been, and to introduce her to the woman I was trying to become. The 5-minute bell shrieked in the hallway, a brutal, jarring intrusion. We both flinched. Students began to pour out of classrooms, their loud, chaotic energy flooding the corridor. The moment was shattered. Lena took a half step back, breaking the magnetic pull. She ran a hand through her hair, looking away from me for the first time. I need to prep for my next class," she said, her voice strained. "Right," I said, my own voice hoarse. "Me too." I turned and walked out of the art room, not fleeing this time, but moving with a deliberate, heavy slowness. The fortress was in ruins. The ground was gone. But the free fall had ended. I had hit something solid. It was the terrifying, undeniable recognition of my own desire. I couldn't hide from it anymore. I couldn't hide from her. The question was no longer if something was going to happen, but when. The tension in the final days before the fair was an almost unbearable, exquisite torture. Every interaction was freighted with the memory of her hands on my hips. We were meticulously polite, ruthlessly efficient. We moved around each other like two dancers who knew their steps intimately, but were terrified to make contact. A shared glance across the crowded staff room felt more intimate than a kiss. When her fingers brushed mine as I handed her a staple gun, I felt it as a full-body shock. My internal monologue, once a fortress of solitude, was now a single repeating mantra of her name. Lena, Lena, Lena. I replayed the moment on the ladder endlessly, dissecting it from every angle. Her touch had not been accidental. It had been a question, an offering. And my stillness, my refusal to pull away, had been an answer. I hadn't run. For the first time, I had stayed. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but for the first time, it was accompanied by a flicker of something else. A wild, reckless yearning. I was tired of being afraid. I was tired of the quiet, gray landscape of my life. Lena was a shock of vibrant color, and I was a moth drawn to her flame, even knowing I might get burned. The night of the Arts and Literature Fair arrived. The gymnasium, usually a cavern of stale sweat and squeaking sneakers, was transformed. It was exactly as Lena had envisioned it. Student paintings were hung on dark cloth panels, illuminated by spotlights. Sculptures stood on pedestals, casting long, dramatic shadows. Vellum sheets of poetry hung like banners from the basketball hoops, the words catching the light. In the center of it all, the origami cranes turned slowly, a kaleidoscope of color. It was magical. It was our creation. I saw Lena across the room, talking to a group of parents. She was wearing a simple, elegant black dress, her hair swept up. She looked radiant, her face flushed with pride and excitement. She caught my eye and gave me a smile so bright, so full of shared victory, that it stole the breath from my lungs. In that moment, all the tension, all the history fell away. There was only a profound sense of connection, of having built something beautiful with this person. The evening was a blur of student readings, proud parents, and polite conversation. I moved through it all in a daze, my awareness tethered to her. I watched her explain a student's ceramic technique, her hands moving with expressive grace. I listened to the low musical sound of her laughter as she spoke with Principal Thompson. We were a team, and we had succeeded. By 10 o'clock, the crowd had thinned, leaving behind a wake of empty wine glasses and crumpled programs. Soon, it was just us, the janitor, and the quiet art. "Well," I said, breaking the silence as we stood in the center of the gym. "We did it." "We did," she said, her voice soft. She was looking at the mobile of cranes, a wistful expression on her face. "It's even better than I imagined." "It's because of you," I said, and the words were true. "Your vision." "It was us," she corrected, turning to face me. The spotlights cast a theatrical glow, illuminating the exhaustion and satisfaction on her face. "It was both of us." We began the slow work of cleaning up, moving in a comfortable, synchronized silence. We took down paintings, stacked chairs, gathered programs. The adrenaline of the evening had worn off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that lowered all our remaining defenses. The gym grew quiet and dim as we turned off the spotlights one by one, until only a single security light remained, casting a pale, lonely glow over the cavernous space. We were left standing near the entrance, a box of leftover programs between us. The silence stretched, no longer comfortable, but thick with everything that had been building for weeks, for a decade. I had to say something. I couldn't let this moment pass, couldn't let us retreat back into our separate corners of politeness and fear. "Lena," I started, my voice barely a whisper. I stopped. I didn't know how to continue. She just watched me, her expression unreadable in the dim, light, patient, waiting. "I can't do this anymore," I finally managed, the words tasting like surrender. A flicker of hurt crossed her face. "Do what?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Work together? I thought we were good." "No, not that." I shook my head. frustration with my own cowardice making my voice tight. This, us, pretending. I took a breath, the confession tumbling out before I could stop it. Pretending I don't know you. Pretending I don't remember that elective studio art class our sophomore year. Pretending I don't remember the way you looked covered in charcoal, or the sketchbook full of drawings you did of me, or the fact that I fell so hard and so fast for you that it terrified me into transferring schools at the end of the semester. The words hung in the air between us, stark and irreversible. Lena stared at me, her face pale in the gloom. The serene mask was gone. In its place was a raw, naked shock. She took a half step back, her hand coming up to her mouth. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought I was going crazy. The first day, in the staff meeting. I saw you, and I thought, but you were so cold. I convinced myself I was wrong, that it was just a resemblance." I was terrified, I admitted, the confession a painful, liberating release. Seeing you again, it was like the last 10 years never happened. All that fear, it came right back. Running away from you was the most cowardly thing I've ever done, and I've spent a decade regretting it. Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and shameful. "I'm so sorry, Lena." She closed the distance between us in 2 quick steps. She reached out, her hand hesitating for a moment before she gently cupped my jaw. Her thumb stroked my cheek, wiping away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. Her touch was everything I remembered and more. Warm, steady, impossibly soft. "Alara," she breathed, and the way she said my name was a prayer, an absolution. I thought I'd imagined it all. I thought I'd invented the way you looked at me back then. "You didn't," I choked out. "It was real. I was just a child, and I was so scared." "We were both children," she murmured, her face so close now I could feel the warmth of her breath. Her hazel eyes searched mine, full of a decade's worth of questions, of what-ifs. And then all the questions disappeared, replaced by a simple, profound certainty. And then she kissed me. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a collision. It was 10 years of silence and regret, and unspoken longing crashing together in a single desperate moment. Her lips were soft and sure against mine, and I melted into her, my hands coming up to tangle in her hair, pulling her closer. It was a kiss of recognition, of coming home to a place I didn't know I had been searching for. All the fear, all the anxiety, and all the carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart. They didn't just crumble, they vaporized. There was no past, no future, only the solid, grounding reality of her mouth on mine, of her body pressed against me in the dim, echoing quiet of the gymnasium. It was a cascade, a dam breaking, a surrender. It was everything. The kiss ended as it began, with a sense of breathless urgency. We broke apart, resting our foreheads together, both of us breathing heavily. Her hands were now tangled in my hair. Mine were resting on the small of her back. The thin fabric of her dress was cool beneath my palms. "So, you do remember?" I whispered into the small space between us. A shaky laugh escaped her. "Remember?" "Alara, I spent a month trying to find you after you disappeared. I thought something had happened to you. I never forgot you." The confession settled into my bones, a warmth that chased away the last of the chill. We stood like that for a long time, simply breathing each other in, 2 ghosts finally admitting they could see one another. The world outside the gym, the school, our jobs, our pasts, felt a million miles away. Eventually the spell was broken by the distant clang of the janitor's cart. Reality began to seep back in. "We should go," Lena murmured against my hair, "before we get locked in for the night." She didn't let go. I didn't want her to. "My classroom or yours?" The question was a joke, but my heart hammered at the implication. Mine, she said without hesitation. It has better light. We gathered our things, our hands brushing, every small touch now an affirmation. We walked out of the gym and down the silent hallway, our shoulders bumping. She unlocked her classroom door and we stepped inside. The room was dark, but she didn't turn on the harsh overheads. Instead, she lit the same candle from the night of the storm, its flame casting a soft, intimate glow over the chaotic, beautiful space. We sat on the old, paint-splattered couch in the corner, not talking at first, just existing in this new reality. I felt fragile, exposed, but for the first time in a very long time, I also felt safe. Then, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a harsh, unwelcome intrusion. I pulled it out. The screen read, "Sasha calling, my sister." My gut clenched. Sasha was the self-appointed keeper of my emotional well-being, which usually translated to unsolicited advice and thinly veiled judgments about my life choices, particularly my history with women. "You should get that," Lena said, her voice soft, understanding. I hesitated. The old instinct to placate, to manage, rising up. But then I looked at Lena, her face open and patient in the candlelight, and a new resolve settled in me. I silenced the call and put the phone face down on the small table next to the couch. "It can wait," I said, the words feeling powerful, decisive. It was a small act, but it was a concrete one. It was me, drawing a line, choosing this, choosing her. A slow smile spread across Lena's face. It was a smile of profound relief and understanding. "Okay," she whispered. She reached out and took my hand, her fingers lacing with mine. "So," she said, her voice gentle, "tell me everything, tell me where you went." And so I did. In the flickering candlelight of the art room, surrounded by the ghosts of our shared creation, I finally told her the truth. I told her about the fear, about the pressure I felt from my family, about the disastrous relationship a few years later that had shattered my confidence and sent me retreating into myself. I told her about the lonely, quiet years and the shock of seeing her in that staff meeting. I laid the rubble of my past at her feet, and she didn't flinch. She just listened, her thumb stroking the back of my hand, her presence a steady, unwavering anchor in the storm of my confession. The first pale light of dawn was filtering through the large art room windows when we finally fell silent. We hadn't moved from the couch, our hands still entwined, the candle long since burned out. The air felt clean, scoured. I was exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. The feeling of having completed a long and arduous journey. "We should probably get out of here before people start showing up," I said, my voice raspy. Lena nodded, her eyes soft. "Probably." Neither of us moved. The thought of walking out of this room, back into the roles of Ms. Reed and Ms. Petrova, felt impossible. "Tonight," she said, her voice firm, cutting through my nascent anxiety. "Let's have dinner, a real date, away from here. No students, no grading, no ghosts." It was a plan, a concrete action, not a vague "we'll figure it out," but a solid, tangible step into a new future. A wave of relief, so potent it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. "Yes," I said, the word coming out with more force than I intended. "I'd love that." We stood up, our joints stiff. As we walked to the door, Lena paused and turned to me. She gently brushed a stray piece of hair from my face, her fingers lingering on my cheek. "I'm glad you didn't run this time, Ilara," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Me too," I whispered. We walked out into the cool morning air of the school parking lot. The world looked different, the colors sharper, the air cleaner. We said a quiet goodbye, and I watched her walk to her car. As I got into my own, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a quiet, steady hope that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. The house in my heart was no longer boarded up. The doors were open, the windows were letting in the light, and for the first time in a very long time, it felt like home. I had spent a decade building walls to keep love out, only to find that the one person I was meant for had the key all along. Haven't we all, at some point, run from a love that felt too big, too real, too terrifying? If you've ever had to choose between the safety of your walls and the terrifying, beautiful risk of opening the door, please let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like the story and subscribe for more.